everyone. Thanks so much. So today my topic is going to be shared inquiry. So I take it that shared inquiry is a rather ubiquitous phenomena. We're all familiar with cases of people answering questions together. And I think these cases run the sort of epistemic gamut from really low stakes cases like friends answering a question together at pub trivia to really rarefied epistemic error like a team of physicians diagnosing a patient. So I'm going to offer in this talk the sketch of a model of shared inquiry, and in doing so, I'm going to proceed from two fundamental modeling assumptions. The first is to assimilate shared inquiries to the broader category of shared activity, which includes activities like building a house together, taking a walk together. And the second is to recognize where shared inquiries differ from these other kinds of activities. And I want to highlight quickly 2 points of difference. The first being shared inquiry's distinctive epistemic aim, so inquirers are after an answer to their question, which means a mental state with certain epistemic credentials, like a well-formed true belief or something, or knowledge. This isn't necessarily the case in our practical activities. And the currency in which shared inquiries trade is going to be different from other kinds of more practically oriented shared activities. Shared inquiries are going to be concerned with epistemic considerations like reasons and justification. And those kinds of considerations are possibly going to be more hard to keep track of than practical factors like the color of paint you have or the direction which you're headed on our walk. So with those modeling assumptions in view, we can start towards setting out for ourselves the task at hand. So in offering this model of shared inquiry, I want to answer 2 questions. The first is metaphysical and asks just what this underlying metaphysical structure of our shared inquiries looks like. The second is normative, and it asks which norms govern the process of shared inquiry, what pressures are incumbent upon shared inquirers. Like I said, my aim in this paper is to develop a model that can answer both these questions and do so in a way that opens up an interesting set of questions, an interesting avenue of research for epistemologists. So that's the task for today. And I'll just note also at the outset that I'm going to draw pretty heavily on some of Michael Bratman's pioneering work in shared agency. And doing so, I'm also going to be focusing, at least in this talk, on cases of small scale shared inquiry. So cases where inquirers proceed with open lines of communication, without authority relations, with things out in the open between them. For how this might scale up, the model I develop, but we can talk more in the Q&A. Okay. So the plan is to get started with cases where inquiry goes wrong, cases of what I call hijacked inquiry. Once we have these cases on the table and sort of a diagnostic bar to clear, I'm going to discuss briefly 2 building blocks for this model of shared inquiry, 2 core features for the model I want to develop before offering an argument about inquiry's aim, which in turn highlights the structural feature of our shared inquiries, and from the structural feature, driving norms that ultimately help us diagnose hijacked inquiries and answer both their questions. So I'll start then talking about hijacked inquiries. So consider these 2 cases of shared inquiry where things go awry. So Peter, Gabor, and Adam are 3 strangers grouped together for a pub trivia team. They're allotted 15 minutes per question. They've been considering their first question on a matter in which none of them have any particular expertise for 3 minutes when Adam thinks he's come to the answer. He says the answer is D, grabs the paper, records his answer, and turns it in to be scored. Second example, chess. Prior to a small match against local competition, Judith Boga's normal team seconds falls into a mysterious coma. Judith hires 3 local chess players to aid in her preparation for tomorrow's encounter, Zoltan, Beth, and Benny. Specifically, they're to figure out which line she should employ as black. They're quite good players, but they possess no special expertise in any particular facet of the game. They're rather good generalists. In despair of her prospects for tomorrow, Judith returns to the hotel to relax and tasks her new seconds with analyzing her best route of defense when playing as black. Judith instructs them to stay in a conference room together until their shared inquiry is complete, and to call her when it's clear which variation of the Sicilian defense she should utilize. After a few hours of them each consulting the web and some well-regarded theory books, Zoltan pops up, calls Judith, and tells her it's clear she should play the Scheveningen variation. Okay, so I think clearly things go wrong in these 2 cases, trivia and chess, but it's hard to say exactly what that is. What we can use sort of as a theoretical placeholder for now is recognition of the fact that it seems like Adam and Zoltan, in their impropriety, fail to give their co-inquirers appropriate due. They seem to take control or seize control of their shared inquiry. They consider it closed and testify on its basis without any kind of collaboration or cooperation with their co-inquirers, without doing so in the right way, at least. For now, we can, as a theoretical placeholder, refer to this impropriety as epistemic hijacking. Diagnosing epistemic hijacking is going to be a task for later, but I just want to note that it's not so clear extant philosophical resources can do the job, and we can talk more about that in Q&A, but we can stipulate that Adam and Zoltan are honest, they have good evidence, they actually get the right answer and so on. And nevertheless, the sense of impropriety I take it remains. The answer I'm going to motivate and what follows is that norms of shared inquiry are violated by Adam and Zoltan, norms of shared inquiry that pressure them towards collaboration. But for now, I think we can turn instead to the building blocks of the model of shared inquiry I want to develop. Okay, so I think a good model of shared inquiry is going to need to be able to tell us two things. It's going to need to be able to tell us what it is to do something to do something together in the way with which we're concerned, and it's going to need to be able to tell us when the thing that we're doing together is inquiring. So the first part of this answer, the first way I want to answer this question is by turning to Michael Bradman's work on shared intentional activity and shared agency, and the second is by turning to Jane Friedman's work on inquiry. So I'll start with the Bradman. So I want to draw on Michael Bradman's influential approach to shared agency, where Bradman sees a key feature of our shared agency being shared intentions, where these are familiar everyday intentions, plan states, albeit with a special kind of content, the content that refers to us and to intending that we do something. So Bradman will say that I intend that we X, where X is the shared goal that our activity is to achieve, is the shared intention at the heart of our shared activities. Now, Bradman also offers a number of conditions that are sufficient for securing shared agency. I'm going to highlight three of particular importance for what follows and refer to those three and the rest, this long laundry list of conditions, as conditions in what follows, but I want to talk about three in particular. So the first condition I want to talk about is that of interlocking intentions. So our intentions interlock when they make reference to one another. So I intend that we X and we proceed by way of your intention, where this all proceeds by these conditions mentioned. And intentions interlocking is important because it helps us pick out our co-participants and it places conditions on how we proceed, such that I intend that we proceed so that your intention too is satisfied in executing our joint endeavor, where this helps rule out, for example, coercion. Second important condition is that of mutual responsiveness, where basically what this is pressures that participants in shared activity are going to face to tracking the roles their co-participants are playing and ensuring their co-participants are on track to successfully play their part in completing our shared endeavor, and vice versa. So I'm going to adjust how I proceed in being mutually responsive and even maybe help you in playing your role in being mutually responsive to ensure we all remain on track to secure a shared end. And closely related to this are pressures of subplan mesh. So we can think of subplan mesh as follows, right? So if we have these intentions, which are plan states, they're not born sort of fully formed from the outset. Often we come across various intermediary steps to complete as we set out to execute our intentions. These intermediary steps or subplans will, in our shared agencies, need to be filled in ways that are responsive to our co-participants. In particular, we need subplans to be filled in ways that are compatible according to Bradman, where this compatibility or mesh is achieved when subplans can be taken together and jointly executed. So for example, if I have a subplan to paint a house blue and you have one to paint it a primary color, we're good. But if my subplan is to paint the house yellow and yours to paint it brown, then we have an issue because our subplans can't be taken together as stipulated and successfully jointly executed. So shared agency involves pressure to ensure these subplans mesh, Bradman writes. Okay, so these are the three important conditions and the sort of contours of the first building block, the Bradman approach to shared intentional activity, to shared agency. And with this building block on the table, we can turn to inquiry. Okay, so in recent work, Jane Friedman offers an analysis of inquiry that I want to pick up, which focuses and centers interrogative attitudes at the heart of inquiry, attitudes which take questions as their content. So Friedman wants to understand inquiry primarily by appeal to these interrogative attitudes, as they help characterize the relationship inquirers are going to have with certain questions. And once we characterize this relationship, we can specify how it is inquirers should proceed in inquiry and what's required to appropriately settle such what's required to appropriately settle our inquiries. So just a bit more about interrogative attitudes. They're attitudes to take questions as their content and involve things like curiosity and wondering or contemplation. And Friedman's going to argue that once we have interrogative attitudes on the board, we're going to need full beliefs in an answer to our question to dissolve them. And in particular, combinations of interrogative attitudes and other mental states are going to be impermissible. So it would be impermissible for an inquirer to have an answer to their question and also continue to hold an interrogative attitude towards it, to continue to inquire to it. And also, Friedman argues we're going to have instrumental pressures that characterize inquiry, so that if I have an interrogative attitude, I want to figure out a question, I'm inquiring, I should take steps to answer it. Friedman argues that these instrumental pressures help point us in directions of revision towards a standard canon of epistemic normativity. We can talk more about that in the Q&A, but for now I want to move on, having sort of centered our approach towards shared inquiry, having grounded it in these two building blocks, the Bratman approach to shared intentional activity and the Friedmanian interrogative approach to inquiry. We still, however, have one more piece of the puzzle, I think, to really get somewhere in terms of building a model of shared inquiry, and that's going to require answering what exactly it is inquirers are after and what they should be after in their practice of inquiry. So I'll turn to that now. Okay, so now I want to understand and offer an understanding of inquiry's aim. And in particular, I want to argue what I think is plausible is that inquirers aim at answering their questions in such a way as improves their epistemic state. Beyond that, I want to offer a sort of ecumenical understanding of such improvement, which I call restricted pluralism. The restricted pluralist approach to what counts as improvement of epistemic state says that past a certain threshold, any epistemic good secured counts for genuine improvement. And I want to contend that the lower bound for genuine improvement here, the threshold inquirers need to surmount, is going to be answering a question truly in at least a minimally justified way. So coming to a minimally justified true belief in an answer to the question of inquiry. And I want to suggest that this is an appropriate lower bound because I'm skeptical that coming to the truth counts as genuine improvement if it comes by way, for example, of merely lucky or arbitrarily employed belief formation methods. So for example, if I get the answer to a question by consulting our tea leaves or flipping a coin, it's hard to say, I think, and hard to swallow that that's what inquirers can plausibly be or should be after in their inquiries, so we can talk more about this in the Q&A. But with this restricted pluralist understanding of the improvement of epistemic state aim of inquiry, I think we can add a bit more content to the shared intention that's going to be at the heart of our shared inquiries. In particular, we can give it the following content. So our shared intention is going to say, I intend that we answer our question correctly in a way that improves our epistemic state, where this improvement can be specified explicitly or merely tacitly as some degree of improvement beyond this lower bound of true belief in a minimally justified way, and where this proceeds by way of the conditions Bratman highlighted for us earlier. So with our shared intention clear, I think we can now turn to arguments which highlight a structural feature of our shared inquiries. So the first argument I want to highlight returns to the pressures of subplan mesh we discussed a few minutes ago. In particular, what I'm concerned with here are sort of final subplans we get as our shared inquiries come to a close. So we can imagine cases in which I'm inquiring and you're inquiring together. And as our shared inquiry comes to a close, I've collected more evidence here, you've collected more evidence there. And we're going to start filling in the sort of shared intention that's structuring our shared inquiry. In particular, I'm going to intend that we answer our question in a certain way, where this way is the answer to inquiry I think I found. So we're not quite done yet once I filled in this intention in such a way, because to successfully execute our intention, to successfully discharge its pressures and to rest with our shared inquiry complete, I'm going to need us to answer our inquiry in that way, or at least in a compatible way, given that my intention makes reference to you and yours to me. I intend that we answer a question in a certain kind of way. So I'm going to think I have the answer. I'm still going to need to make sure that we answer our question in that kind of way, or at least a compatible way. So what it looks like I'll have here then is a final subplan, a subplan where the last thing to do is ensure or make sure that you're also going to answer our question in the right kind of way, that we can both take our inquiry settling answers and jointly execute on them. So this is going to look a lot like a final subplan, a penultimate subplan in our shared inquiries. But here we're going to still face pressures of subplan mesh. And to ensure that our subplans do mesh here, I think what we're going to need is an opportunity to talk to one another, what I want to call a collaborative step, an opportunity to propose an inquiry settling judgment that we think we found and ensure that our co-inquirers stand ready with their final subplans if they've reached that stage, such that our subplans mesh and we can successfully execute our inquiries appropriately. This is one argument which points out a structural feature of our shared inquiries, a penultimate stage of our shared inquiries, in which we're going to need to talk to one another and ascertain and potentially assent to an inquiry settling judgment. Second argument I want to offer draws on the pressures of mutual responsiveness we discussed earlier. So those pressures, recall, involve tracking the role we were playing and our co-participants were playing in our shared endeavor. Now, in our practical activities, I think a lot of the tracking that's going to be involved will be fairly out in the open. You know, I see where you're heading with the ladder, I see what color paint you brought, and so on. But as we noted, what's distinctive about shared inquiry in particular is that its currency is a bit more inconspicuous. So what I suggest is that we extend our conception of mutual responsiveness past the sort of Bratmanian letter to include mutual responsiveness towards the ways and the epistemic considerations on the basis of which we plan to settle our inquiries. I think this is a natural enough extension to capture the sort of epistemic role we're playing in a distinctively epistemic kind of shared activity, where to track that you're on, to track your playing of your role means ensuring that you're on the right track towards getting things right, at least so I see it, and you for me. So you're going to want to track and ensure that I'm on track to answer a question appropriately. What I think this suggests then is as we're getting closer and closer to achieving our shared end towards answering our inquiry once and for all, answering the question to our inquiry at the heart of our inquiry once and for all, these pressures of tracking are going to increase, and we're going to need an opportunity to ensure that we're appropriately both on track. We're playing our role, and our path towards achieving our shared end successfully is clear. What that's going to require then, I think, is an opportunity as inquiry comes to a close to ask after and assess our inquiry settling answers and perhaps the reasons underlying them. So what that's going to require, just as we saw in the previous argument, is a structural feature in our shared inquiry, is a collaborative step, an opportunity to talk about potential inquiry settling judgments before we consider a shared inquiry appropriately closed. Okay, so I've offered two arguments that I think highlight structural features of our shared inquiry. This penultimate stage of our shared inquiry is at least collaborative step. So what is this collaborative step? The way I want to understand it is as an analog of a meeting of the minds in contract laws, sort of zetetic meeting of the minds, an opportunity to ask after and discuss putative inquiry settling judgments before we sort of proceed with the mutual understanding necessary to appropriately settle our shared inquiry. I think the pressure for this step comes in part from the shared nature of our endeavors, so these pressures of subplan mesh and mutual responsiveness, as well as the kind of aim that we as inquirers will have, an aim that concerns genuine epistemic improvement. So we're going to need opportunities to ensure that our subplans mesh and we're being mutually responsive as we're on track to achieving this kind of aim. So to make sure we didn't get things luckily right, to make sure we did get things right at all. So once we have the conjunction of the shared nature of our endeavor, as well as the aim that's going to guide our endeavor, we get pressures towards a collaborative step. We might think our collaborative step functions a bit like a mesh creating mechanism, which is an opportunity to restore mesh in certain kinds of shared activities if it isn't already. Maybe our collaborative step is going to just be an opportunity to return to a zetetic drawing board if we can't come to an agreement and conduct future experiments. Maybe it'll be an opportunity for us to recognize our epistemic standards are too different and we can no longer inquire together successfully. In any case, what the collaborative step is going to evolve is reasoning together, shared deliberation and reasoning, communication with one another to ensure we're all on the same page to achieving distinctively our epistemic aim. So I think the collaborative step reflects an important part of properly settling our shared inquiries, and it highlights our epistemic interdependence, the ways in which our epistemic activity ensures we're beholden to one another. Okay, so we have this collaborative step on the table, and now I think we can generate some rough norms that guide shared inquirers that are incurred by its presence. So the first norm I think plausible is the following, what I call cert, which says that if S is a participant in the shared inquiry, S should not testify outright on the basis of an inquiry settling answer prior to the successful execution of a collaborative step. Second, more restrictive norm, Soros says that if S is a participant in the shared inquiry, S should not consider their putative answer to the question of shared inquiry as outright inquiry settling prior to the successful execution of the collaborative step. Basically, then what these norms are saying is until a collaborative step has been appropriately executed, until we're sure we've done our duty as participants in a shared endeavor, until we're sure that we're on track and will achieve our aims as inquirers, we shouldn't talk about inquiry as though it was settled. We shouldn't unreservedly consider our answer to inquiry something we can just sort of testify freely about, nor should we consider our answer to the inquiry we propose as outright inquiry settling. We shouldn't consider our inquiry settled, shared inquiry, at least just because I've come to an answer I find plausible. So with these norms in play, and we can talk more about them in the Q&A, we're able to offer a diagnosis of epistemic hijacking. In particular, the epistemic hijackers, in the cases we saw, Adam and Zoltan, fail to leave room for a collaborative step. They fail to properly settle their shared inquiries, but they talk and think about their answers to their shared inquiry as though they have. In doing so, they violate cert and Soros. Now, we can specify a bit more what appropriate execution comes to in such a way as to leave room for various social and pragmatic pressures to infuse our shared inquiries. We can talk more about that in the Q&A too. But I just want to close briefly by recognizing the sort of novel lines of research certain Soros open up for epistemology. So what I think is interesting about these two norms is that they render inappropriate behavior that'd be perfectly proper had our inquirers been going at things alone. So we can stipulate, right, that Adam and Zoltan come to the right answer, they do so in a justified way. All they're missing, according to certain Soros, is a kind of collaborative buy-in, a kind of cooperation involving their co-inquirers, and that renders their epistemic behavior, their belief formation, their testimony inappropriate. But those aren't traditional features we're thinking about when we're thinking as epistemologists about what makes belief formation appropriate or dispositional features of beliefs, nor are in thinking about testimony, are we thinking about who testifiers are speaking for, or rather the context of collaboration from which they're speaking. So certain Soros add additional conditions to these lists that epistemologists should be concerned about in thinking about appropriate testimony and appropriate belief formation. In particular, I think they highlight how our sociality, our social factors of cooperation and acting together affect what's epistemically permissible in ways that, as cases of hijacked inquiry make clear, restrict appropriate belief formation and appropriate testimony. So I think understanding shared inquiry opens up a line of future research for us as normative epistemologists, understanding the interplay between our social context of cooperation and our lives as epistemic agents. Thanks so much.